Today's video was sponsored by my good friends over at Spider Dude Comics. You can check out their links in the description below. You guys can save 10% off of any order by using the code JOURNOS10. This code never expires. And also, if they have any other promotions going on their website, you can always piggyback the JOURNOS10 to get that extra 10% off as well. You can search by Marvel or DC or certain ages like Silver to Golden, or your favorite characters like mine, Spider-Man. You guys could see a little bit of what they got going on here. Again, Silver Age to modern books. Stuff is extremely well priced. If you know me by now, you know that I only push those that I truly support and that I truly believe in. So again, guys, go check out SpiderDudeComics.com. You can also follow them on Instagram, and you can check out their YouTube channel by finding their link in the description below or finding their YouTube link on their website. Good friend of the channel, Collector Without Fear. We got some War Machine action. Iron Man issue 282. So let's read what Collector Without Fear wrote here. Props or flops time. Iron Man issue 282. There's a lot of confusion with this book. I love how he breaks this down too, because
so good. Yeah.
He's very accurate and factual with this, and everyone watching and listening, there's so much that matters with context, and I want you guys to pay attention here. All right, he goes on to say, there's a lot of confusion with this book, as a lot of people mistakenly refer to it as the first appearance of War Machine, even CGC. It's actually the first cover appearance of the War Machine armor worn by Tony Stark. The armor fully appeared for the first time in the previous issue. Rhodey dons the armor a few issues later, and then first uses the War Machine moniker, the name, in West Coast Avengers 94. But it's a key, nonetheless, and certainly an iconic cover. Yes, it is. I picked this book up for only $70. I've examined every square inch of this book, cover to cover, and it is every bit a 9.6, quite possibly a 9.8. It is pristine. While it's definitely a PC book, it's always nice to have value in the collection rather than being upside down on a book. And with Armor Wars still coming, hopefully this decade, I think this book only climbs in value. Not only that, but with CGC calling it the first full appearance of War Machine, even though it's not, that also drives the market price on the book up, because unfortunately there are collectors out there who don't necessarily know the full details, like its actual key significance. All right, well said. Okay, before we look at this, the sales numbers on this book, and I give it a props or flops, I want to add context to labels. Okay, there's always this conversation that says, well, this is the first full appearance. No, it's a cameo. No, it's full. And then somebody jumps in and says, let the market decide. I've talked about this before. No, the market never decides. The market doesn't. You don't go to a farmer's market and have a booth of apples and pears, and the pears, are the hot item. Apples used to be the hot item, but then the pears become the hot item because somebody mistakenly thought that they were apples, right? And then you just, the market decided, I guess they're apples. No, the pear is a pear. Right? Okay. Maybe not the best analogy, but the point that I'm making here is
it's a good analogy.
Okay. Yeah. Criteria defines labels. Definitions define labels, not the market. But now let me explain how this can be confusing for a search situation like this. The label has been defining what the market does and how the market reacts to the book. It doesn't mean that the market is, or the label is correct. Let's go back to the, tales as old as time argument of Hulk 180 and 181. The reason why Hulk 181 was decided to be the more valuable book on the market is because people saw this new character on the cover and went after it, because the cameo at the end, the one page of Wolverine at the end of that book when it came out wasn't enough. They were like, who is this new character on this cover that's in the whole story of this 181 issue? That's what drove the price up. Now, with that being said, if a book is labeled a certain way, it absolutely can influence the market. Because sometimes, like Collector Without Fear, they don't educate themselves to what's in the book. And that can happen more nowadays. Because back in 1974, right, we didn't have Key Collector or Cover Price or the internet or YouTubers or anybody telling us what the first and full or cameo and all this stuff really was. So we decided on ourselves by picking up the books and then talking amongst friends. That's different today. So it very easily can get taken out of context to where the value of this book is because this label that is inaccurate has been slapped on this book for a very long time and it's just stuck. All right. I wanted to make that clear. Now, before I go into breaking down the market, do you guys want to just kind of drop any opinions on just that state of things pertaining?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with a lot of what you say. Basically the market can't possibly dictate what is the content of the comic books. What someone might say, what someone might buy does not change what is inside the books. There might be a slight change in phrasing depending on who you ask, but the contents of the book is the same. The market will, though, decide what is the most important key issue for a character. And despite this not actually being Rhodey inside the costume, it is the most important War Machine book, just like X-Men 266, Gambit's second appearance, is the most important Gambit book. The first cameo of Bishop, also first cover appearance, is the more expensive of the two Bishop books, so on and so forth. That being said, this book is actually even more expensive than Rhodey's first appearance.
That's crazy.
Which was what? Not quite 2 decades, a decade and a half, 15 years before. So you're talking about this book from the early 90s versus a book from the late 70s. Right. Crazy that's the case. Now that's the case with raw copies. Obviously, when you get a 9/8 book from the late 70s, it's quite expensive and more than the but I'm talking about like just a high grade raw copy of each. The War Machine is worth more. It's nuts. But yeah, anyway, Chris, go on to your props or flops, or if anyone else wants to chime in. Mike, Jeff, go ahead.
I talked about this a little bit last week on my thing, and my next show is going to go into some more aspects of it, so I'm not going to talk a ton about it here. But regarding this book, I'll just say, like, I talk a lot on my show about what I say is the cover always wins. And this is like the perfect example of that, because Collector Without Fear is exactly right. This is Tony in the armor. So Tony in this armor is Iron Man. Rhodey in this armor is War Machine. And this is a full 2 issues before, really the first appearance of War Machine. But it's got a badass cover. And the cover of 284 is terrible. If this was the cover of 284, that would be the book all day long. But this is just like you said, Joe. This is always going to be the book for War Machine. I think having the War Machine sort of graffiti over the title doesn't hurt either. Yeah. But it's just the cover wins on this one. Period.
I agree. I like everything you said about that, Mike. Especially the emphasis on the cover. But Chris, let's get to the breakdown here.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, with what Mike just said, is that again, what drove this book is the inherent properties. And that's like the cover always wins. Well, I'll use Joe bringing up the Bishop example. Bishop's cameo, first cameo, is worth more than his first full, because in the cameo, he's on the cover for the first time. Hence 181, Hulk 181. So again, it's like, we forget that we value things about comic books that are inherent to the pages of the book. We don't just magically create labels and then decide, oh, well, that's why I'll spend more money on this. But again, in this day and age, because everyone is so reactionary and just wants to listen to a YouTuber or listen to what Key Collector or what CGC says, and again, not knocking them, I'm not saying it as a negative thing to them, but well, they say that this is this, it must mean that I need to react in this manner, right? So anyways, all great input there. So yeah, let's get into the values of this book. So remember, he said he bought this for $70, and he definitely thinks it's a near mint plus. 9.6 all day, could possibly be a 9.8. So I'm going to break this down. For right now, you looking at Raws, near mint plus ranges. And again, when you look at Raws, this is what the sellers on eBay or My Comic Shop, or wherever they're selling them from, note these comics to be. But if you got a comic book seller saying that it's near mint plus, please, I hope that they're accurate. Right now, average range for a near mint plus raw is about $100. The book in a near mint plus raw was averaging about $200 during the COVID peak. Now, in the near mint range, which is anywhere from 9.0 to 9.4, it's averaging about $70, right where what he paid for it. So, and again, subjectivity of grading, closer to around 140 during the COVID peak for that near mint range. So in the raw values, we see that they are trending at about 50% less than where they were at their peak. Now let's look at graded. Let's say if he sends his book in to get graded and it comes back a 9.6. 9.6 graded average right now is about 140. COVID peak, it was about 300. Again, roughly, 50%, a little over 50%. Say he gets it pressed and clean and he sends it in and it comes back a 9.8. Right now, a 9.8 is averaging around 300. COVID peak, 650. So a little more than 50% drop on that. So it's all very similar. The drops from the COVID peak are similar for the raws, for the grade range, for the graded books, and for each grade range. Now, if you think about that, if he did send it in and got it graded, spent about $30 on top of his $70, and was able to sell it for $140, right now he's still making money. If he got a 9.8, spent an extra, $25 to press it, clean it on top of the 30, and spend a little over $100, sells it for 300, he's making even more money. And if he really does believe that it's in the near mint plus range, maybe next week he could sell it for $100 or $90 and get a little money in his pocket. So this should be an easy props, right? I mean, even just looking at him being able to flip it right now, possibly have more money in his pocket. Well, not so fast. I'm a little weary of this book because of its trend. Again, it's an early 90s book, so there's plenty of them out there. And with the way the market's doing right now, and with seemingly the delays in Armor Wars and what's going on, this book can continue to drop some. So the question that I got to ask long term is, does this book have staying power, even if it drops past that $70 mark that he paid for it, in 5 years from now, for him to be able to see a positive return on investment? I'm going to say yes, and for that reason, I'm giving it a props. And the reason why I say yes is because of this. Just like what we talked about before, this book, because of its cover primarily and what it is, not because of the label that CGC or anybody wants to give it, this book means something to the War Machine character. And the War Machine character was already an awesome character before we saw Don Cheadle portray him in the MCU. Don Cheadle is an amazing actor. His portrayal as War Machine has been great, and he is coming back. And while I'm always very hesitant to talk about movie hype these days, and I always try to tell you guys to educate yourself and chill out on the FOMO and the socio-cultural acceptance of how we respond to the me, now mentality, I also have to acknowledge the fact that pop culture and is going to be here for a very long time. I think I was just talking about this last week. You know, these movies, just like I use Star Wars as the example. You know, we raise our kids. I remember when they were doing the prequels in the movies again. It was like what, 2012 or I don't know, somewhere like the 15th anniversary of Phantom Menace. And I went and took my son, and it was the first ever movie in the theater, Star Wars movie that I took my son to, and I was so happy, and I posted on Facebook, taking my son to the movies to see Star Wars like my father did before me. You know, right? That's gonna be, can you imagine, like, we're gonna be taking our kids in, or even not even us, our kids that grew up going and seeing Endgame and Infinity War in the movie theaters when they were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever. When they grow up and have kids and we get that 30-year anniversary of Endgame or whatever, and they're taking their kids to the movie theater and like, man, you know, when they're freaking sitting there saying the same thing, saying this is an amazing experience that I get to have with my children, because these movies are going to be here and they're going to be ingrained in pop culture. And I think that this character is going to continue not only the intrinsic values and properties of what this book is to us as comic collectors. I do think that Don Cheadle's character is also going to continue to have a future in the MCU, and that character has already sustained himself as a pop culture icon in the MCU. Therefore, no matter what happens, even though I think I'm a little worried about, you know, the next coming year or so, what the market's going to do, that this book can drop a little bit more, I absolutely think that in 5 years from now, and again, it's a modern book, there's plenty out there, but I think this book is going to continue to increase in value 5, 10 plus years from now.
Mike.
Again, agree. I think it in general to props. I think this book is going to have staying power. Just like, you know, I agree with basically everything Chris said. I think if you bought this for the purpose of flipping, I would just say, if you're going to CGC it, whatever, just have it ready for a War Machine trailer to drop, and it's going to go through its cycle of FOMO again at that time, and it's going to shoot up, you know, and that's a great time to sell it if that's why you got it. But I think this is a book that everybody kind of wants in their PC if they're a Marvel fan or something, and I think you got it at a decent price, and it's you know, it's going to do well.
Agreed. Joe.
Yep. What they said. You know, this is a character who has been around in the MCU in one form or another since the very first movie. You know, back when it was Terrence Howard for a film. That being said, you know, whether he gets killed off in the MCU or he continues in, you know, a supporting role, the character's made his mark already. This isn't a flash in the pan character by any means. Not in the comics, not in the movies, not in pop culture in general. People are going to want this book. And yes, it is a 90s book, but it was also late in the run of a B-list character. It's not an Amazing Spider-Man book or an X-Men book from the 90s. And therefore, there are not as many of them as those books. You know, First Carnage, what X-Men book would have come out around that time? First Jubilee or first Gambit. Now, obviously, Carnage and Gambit, way more popular characters. So those books are worth quite a bit more, even though there's more of them. But yeah, I mean, it's a good book, especially if you have a high grade for modern stuff, 9.6, 9.8 possible. Those are going to hold value the best and gain value the most. So that being said, it's a props for me. Even if we do see a dip in the short term, I think that in the long term, we will see an increase, almost certainly.
They should say that the Skrull took over Rhodey between Iron Man 1 and 2, and that he was just a really bad Skrull.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go. But yeah, again, he's already made his mark in cinema and obviously in the comic book. So $70, you're getting that pretty much at a 30% reduced rate. Is that the appropriate way to say it? I don't know. You're getting, you're purchasing 30% off, below fair market value from what you believe it is. The collector without fear, I think that's a win. Props all day.